Welcome, I'm Sarah Mears. I'm the Programme Manager for Libraries Connected. It's really lovely to be here today with this particular webinar. I just want to say we are recording today's session, so if you don't want to be on the recording, then obviously feel free to turn your camera off. But it's always nice to see people's faces as well. So if you don't mind being on the camera, that's great too. As we go through the session, please do put any questions in the chat and we'll try and pick them up and do a Q&A at the end of the session. If you want to unmute and answer your own question, that's fine. Just let me know in the chat and then we'll ask you to do that. And if you can keep your mics on mute just while the presentations are going on, that'd be really helpful. But I think everyone knows the drill now for those. And we will be sending out the slides to you afterwards. As I say, we're recording this, but we'll send out the slides as well. So I'm really delighted to be introducing our two speakers today. So we've got Nicola Currie and Sarah McGowan. Nicola Currie is a research fellow on the Leverhulme Trust Reading and Wellbeing Project, exploring readers' perceptions of whether and how reading narrative fiction supports wellbeing across the lifespan. And Nicola has a placement grant, so we're really fortunate that she's actually currently working with Libraries Connected as well as other partners as part of the project. So we've been talking a lot to Nicola over the last few months. And Sarah McGowan is the director of the Literacy Lab at the University of Edinburgh, and she's going to be talking about research-informed approaches to enhance children's reading motivation and engagement. And so we're really excited to have both of them with us. And we're going to start with Sarah. Sarah's going to speak for about 20 minutes and then we'll hand over to Nicola. And as I say, if you could please put any questions in the chat as we're going along, that would be amazing. But now I'm going to hand over to the other Sarah.
Thank you so much. So just so you know, from beforehand, we did practice sharing screen and there was a little bit of an issue with a black box appearing. So just bear with us. Emma, can you let me know? Is that
Yeah, it's quite, that's if you can move it up a little bit more, that would be amazing. But you're right, it's still right at the top of the screen now, so I think it's okay.
yeah, can everyone see the text okay? I don't think I can change it anymore.
Yeah, no, the
Is
text
that
is
okay?
fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about a couple of projects that we've been running over the last few years. And we'll be talking specifically about Love to Read and the Young People's Reading Project as well. And both of these projects are really aiming to increase children and young people's reading enjoyment and engagement too. Ooh. Okay, so why are we doing this research? So we tend to work in collaboration with different organisations. Some of the research that I'll be talking about today has been in collaboration with the National Literacy Trust, the Scottish Book Trust and Education Scotland as well. And our partners at National Literacy Trust for the last almost 20 years have been carrying out annual surveys of children and young people's reading and writing as well. And what they found is that reading and writing attitudes and engagement are at an all-time low. And this is obviously something that we care a lot about. You'll care about this as library professionals as well. And so the research that I've been carrying out for the last 15 years or so has really been focusing on understanding how we can motivate children and young people to want to read more and to improve the quality of their reading experiences too. Most of the research that we've been carrying out has been with educational professionals, so primary, secondary school teachers, school leaders, educational psychologists. But we really see the relevance of our research for libraries and library professionals too. And we're delighted to have the opportunity to come along today and to talk about our research, see what you think about it as well, and see if there's some way for us to work more collaboratively together in order to support the reading attitudes and engagement. Before I go on to talk about the two projects, I just want to talk a little bit about the concepts that I've been using. So as I said, for the last 15 years or so, I've been concentrating on these areas of reading motivation and engagement. And reading motivation basically reflects the drive or the desire to want to read. We know that children and young people who are more motivated to read are more likely to choose to read, but are also more likely to deeply engage with the books that they read. And it's this depth of engagement that's really important for a number of outcomes. So children and young people who are more intrinsically motivated to read are going to show higher levels of behavioural engagement. That is, they'll spend more time reading. They'll show higher levels of cognitive engagement. That is, they'll put more cognitive effort into what they're reading and also implement strategies to support their comprehension. For example, rereading or decoding new words. We also know that when we're more motivated to read, we tend to engage ourselves more emotionally in what we read too. And Nicola's going to be focusing on this later on. But by effective engagement, I mean levels of reading enjoyment, level of interest in the text as well, the extent to which we may explore personally meaningful content as we read, and we use our imagination. And of course, reading is not just a solitary activity. We can also engage in reading activities with others, which again can lead to a number of positive outcomes. And so my work has really been looking at what principles can we put into place, what conditions, what context can we put into place to increase children and young people's reading motivation and their engagement as well. And our work to date has been carried out in collaboration with children, with young people, with teachers, and as I said, with different organisations too. So I'm going to focus first of all on the Love to Read project, which focuses specifically on children and how we can increase their reading motivation and engagement. Love to Read is underpinned by 6 research-informed principles, which I'll discuss today, which are principles that need to be embedded in order to have the greatest chances of increasing reading enjoyment and engagement. The Love to Read project was funded by the Nuffield Foundation and was carried out from 2021 to 2023. And then we were really fortunate to get to retain some of that funding in order to carry out Love to Read libraries, which is just being completed. So I will be talking about Love to Read libraries today. And basically, as I said at the beginning, most of our work to date has been carried out within the education sector, but we really see the role of libraries and librarian professionals to support children's reading enjoyment and engagement. And we want to work more collaboratively with you to achieve this. So Love to Read libraries was about taking these research-informed principles and thinking about how these can be embedded within library contexts. As a result of this project, we have a short guide which has been carried out, and huge thanks to all of the professionals that help with this. We've got a 10-page guide which is designed to be sort of accessible, to share the most recent research with library professionals. We've got printable and editable resources that can easily be downloaded. And we've also got guided activities for when schools come to libraries, which have been tried and tested within library or school contexts. So I'll just talk through each of these principles now. The first principle is that of access. In order to support reading for pleasure, it's really important that children have regular and easy access to books which reflect their interests, preferences, lives, experiences, and abilities. And of course, libraries are essential sites for children to be able to access these types of texts. We know that there are huge inequalities in the provision that children have of books at home. And so libraries, the Love to Read Libraries Guide is really about advocating for the importance and the necessity of libraries to support reading enjoyment. But within it, we also have suggested practices that libraries can use to support access. The principle of choice is about child agency and children having choice over their reading and also their reading activities. It talks about the importance of libraries having a good structure to support children's choices, but also children developing the skills as well to choose what they want to read. And this is something which really came out from the Love to Read project, that very often children are taught in school how to read or how to support their comprehension, but they're often not given the skills to choose books. And so within the Love to Read Libraries Guide, we have activities and resources which talk children through the process of choosing a book. So it gets children to think, first of all, about what type of experience are they looking for? Do they want to learn something new, pursue their interests, have a book that will make them laugh, take them on an adventure? And then after this, we talk them through the process of choosing a book as well. And we think that libraries are ideal sites to be able to support children with this process if there are school visits. Time is about children having regular quality time to read books and to take part in book reading activities. And we know that the benefits of reading in terms of for outcomes don't necessarily come from the reading that children do in school, but actually it's leisure time reading that's really important. And of course, libraries and library staff are essential to foster motivation and engagement outside of school. Connection is about children being able to access and choose books and book reading activities which feel personally relevant to them and connect with their own goals. So within the last few years, we've seen increasing recognition about the importance of representation within books for children and for young people as well. That is, children seeing themselves, their lives, their experiences reflected in the books that they read. But children also read for different goals and different reasons and purposes. And so it's really about helping children to find books which really resonate with them in terms of their lives or their experiences on their interests. And Nicola is going to talk a little bit about reflective reading practices and how we can deepen children's reading experiences by getting them to make these connections. Social is about children having the time, the skills, and the confidence to be able to share and discuss books with others. And we recognise the role that libraries can play in creating inclusive opportunities for children to talk about books, to share books, to talk about recommendations in ways which are meaningful to them, and also to provide some support with developing skills in this too. And again, for example, in the Love to Read Libraries guide and resources, we have simple resources that can be used to support these types of activities. And finally, the principle of success is about children needing to have a range of rich and diverse positive reading experiences and to recognise their growing success as readers. So from the Love to Read perspective, being a successful reader isn't about, just having good reading skills. Being a successful reader is being a child who enjoys reading, who feels confident finding books that they will enjoy when a book isn't right for them, a reader who is able to make recommendations to others, or who chooses to read outside of school or uses their imagination when they read. And so we are trying to promote this holistic understanding of what it means to be a reader that's far more inclusive and far more relevant to what that means. And we recognise the important role that librarians and library staff play in championing this as well. So as I said, over the last few months, we've been working with a number of individuals working across different organisations to create a short guide. It's about 10 pages long, with some activities as well that are easy to kind of print out and activities for school-based visits. And if you're interested, there's a link to that there. We also, throughout the Love to Read project, worked in collaboration with 5 schools across the UK in order to exemplify these different principles and to create resources which children would like as well, because part of it is about engaging children as well. And so there's lots of posters and bookmarks and other types of resources that can be printed and used within libraries too. And all of these are just freely available. Okay, so moving on to young people now. As I said at the beginning, over the last 20, well, close to 20 years, the National Literacy Trust have been surveying children and young people's reading and have seen this kind of consistent decline. But the decline is very evident among young people, among teenagers. So whilst you may see higher levels of reading enjoyment and engagement among children, when we get to the teenage years, we really see this dropping off as well. And so for the last 3.5 years, we've been working on the Young People's Reading Project. This has been a project which has been based in Scotland only. So the Love to Read project was based across Scotland and England. But the Young People's Reading Project has been carried out only in Scotland. And we've been collaborating with the Scottish Book Trust and also working with the Young People's Advisory Panel. This is a group of teenagers who've been informing the research, supporting with how we conducted the research and also with the interpretation of findings. And we've been looking at the motivators and the barriers to reading enjoyment and engagement. And this project has been led by Charlotte Webber. And if you're interested in learning more about any of the findings from this project, she's written a number of different blog posts based on this and other projects that we've been running. So in terms of some of the factors that we see influencing young people's reading enjoyment and engagement, what you see are quite similar things coming up from what young people are saying. So they talk about access and choice, very similar to what we found with children as well. And so it's really important, of course, that young people have access to books which reflect their interests, their preferences, their lives. But another thing that young people often talk about as well is wanting access to shorter texts as well, and that often that they can't find texts that help them there. We're also finding the importance of choice as well. So young people having the skills to choose books that they'll enjoy. For many young people, they haven't read in a long time, and so it can be really difficult to think about how to choose a book that's really going to resonate with them, that they'll really enjoy. And so again, developing those skills in choice is really important for young people too. But what we're seeing is particularly important during adolescence and among teenagers is autonomy. So of course that's important for children too, but for teenagers, they want to feel in control of their own reading experiences and don't want to feel that these are being controlled by others. So they want a sense of control over what they read, where they read, why they read, how they read. And that's something which has really come up quite a lot in the conversations we've had with young people. And so it's really important that we put into place context and conditions that support reading enjoyment, but that aren't adult-led or adult-dominated, but that we maybe do this in collaboration with young people. And again, one of the other principles that we're seeing and ideas that we're seeing is that of social, which again resonates with some of the findings that we found with children. Other things that are coming up are the importance of environments. So reading conducive environments. So for example, having comfy spaces, having time, for example, in school to be able to read. And again, I think libraries are able to support with this. Another thing that's really coming up with the young people and really not with the children is this idea of relatable messaging. So young people do want are open to hearing about the benefits of reading, but want this messaging to come in ways which really resonates with what they're interested in, and it comes in a language that they're familiar with as well. And that they want to hear about. So just thinking about a quote from one young person, they complain that they always see posters saying reading takes you into another world. And they say that's not why they want to read. So young people have different purposes, different reasons for wanting to read. I think these idea of adult dominated messages really can actually be off-putting to a lot of young people. And so we do need to be working more collaboratively with teenagers to make sure that the messaging really resonates with the types of language and types of ways of communicating that they would like. And they also spoke about the importance of peers, celebrities, and social media as well in communicating that messaging to them too. And finally, being a teenager is obviously quite different to being a child in terms of the other interests that they may have. And many of them speak about, just not having time to read or read for enjoyment anymore. And again, what we often see within this is just books being too big, too long, too much of a time commitment, and they want to see shorter texts as well. So as I said, Charlotte Webber has been leading this work over the last 3.5 years. And as I said at the beginning, all of the work that we've been doing has been in collaboration with teachers and other professionals. And so in the last month or so, she's been working with teachers within secondary schools to think about how these principles and ideas can be embedded in practice. And this was just a session that she held with, I think, 25 to 30 teachers, where she spoke about each of these different principles, and they came up with ideas of practices that they could maybe put into place to support, for example, access and to support, for example, choice as well. But one of the things that we're really interested in doing is thinking about whether our findings are relevant and useful for librarians and others working within the library sector. And if so, if there's a way that we're able to work with you to support you with your work. So just to summarize, I think children and young people's reading enjoyment and engagement is at an all-time low. As I said, I've spent the last 15 years or so really dedicating myself to understanding more about motivation and enjoyment and engagement. And while a lot of the work that I've been doing has been published in peer-reviewed journals, that's not enough. Really, what we need to do is we need to be able to take these findings and to see real world change. And I'm really interested in seeing if there's any ways that we can work together in order to do this. We really recognise the value and the importance of libraries and library staff to support a love of reading among children and young people. And as I said, we're really keen to work not just with schools now, but with the library sector too, so that we can collectively work together to reverse the trajectory that we're seeing. So just to say, if you feel like we can support your work in any way, please do get in touch. My email there is there, Charlotte's email address is there as well. In particular, if you're interested in working with us to create something to support young people's reading, Charlotte's email address is there, so just get in touch if that's something that you think you'd like to do. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will pass over to Nicola.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you oops, are you able to see most of my screen there? Do we have the issue with the toolbar?
Yeah, with the toolbars, the black bars at the top. So again, it's fine. It won't
okay.
impede your text. So yeah, it's fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for passing on. And sort of following on from Sarah's talk today, I'm going to be talking about another project that we've been conducting at the University of Edinburgh, looking at reading and wellbeing, and focusing on the qualitative insights from children and young people in relation to this. So I'll just give a brief overview of the project and then focus a little bit specifically on the children and young people and thinking about sort of why we wanted to do this research and what the research background is. And then I'll talk about some of our findings and share extracts from the interviews with you from our children and young people involved in the project. And then just move on to think about where we'd like to take this, this next in the future if possible. So just to give a brief overview of the project itself, this is a qualitative research project funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and we've been working in collaboration with partners at Scottish Book Trust, National History Trust and University College London as well. And it's been exploring the relationship specifically between fiction reading and wellbeing from the perspective of readers across the lifespan. So although we're going to be focusing today on the children and young people, we actually have adults and older adults involved in the study as well. Our children were aged 9 to 11, and the young people aged 15 to 17, and the adults aged 30 to 50, and the older adults 63 and older and retired. And if you obviously have interest in any of the other age groups as well, please feel free to also get in touch if you'd like more information on those. We focused on 3 aspects of wellbeing. So the positive emotions that you get from reading itself, but also from being a reader. The connection experiences that you might have through the book and the story world that's created there, and the characters, or either the setting and the location and the author, but also the connection experiences that you might get through being a reader. So whether that be through informal conversations with other people, family members, friends, or joining social activities such as book groups that are focused on book-related conversations. And then finally, personal growth. So we're thinking about what we might learn about ourselves, about others, and about the world more widely through reading fiction. So to do this, we carried out semi-structured interviews, which we had predefined questions that were exploring these different aspects of wellbeing. And we tried to use the same questions across all age ranges so that we could compare between the age groups to see if there are different aspects of wellbeing that are being supported at different ages, perhaps in different ways. The children and young people interviews, they lasted around about half an hour in total. But for the adults and older adults, these are much more extensive and the responses are much longer. So sometimes they lasted up to an hour. So lots of really detailed insight into people's reading experiences. And then to analyse this, we've used thematic analysis in a programme called NVivo, which helps us to pull out the key themes that people are talking about in relation to these different aspects of wellbeing. And as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, I've been lucky enough to conduct a knowledge exchange placement with Libraries Connected and Scottish Book Trust. So that's been running since March and it runs till the end of July. So particularly during this period, if you can see any ways, again, that we can support your work through this project, please do feel free to get in touch. And that can be in relation to any of the age groups. So focusing then on the children and young people and on our findings there, I just wanted to start off with a little bit of background in terms of the research context. We know that there's these well-documented academic and cognitive benefits that we can get from being a reader from a young age. It can boost your vocabulary, it can support your reading comprehension development, many different benefits there. But we also know that fiction books can provide these opportunities for children and young people to relax, to escape to new worlds, to experience adventures, to learn about the perspectives of other people. And all of these types of things can potentially help to support our well-being. More recently, there has also been this shift towards large quantitative studies that again find this positive relationship between reading and well-being. So the more time you spend engaged in literacy activities or the more time you spend reading in your own time actually has this positive relationship with well-being scores. But what we wanted to try and do with this project is try and understand how well-being is helping to support, how reading is helping to support well-being, because we kind of lack this in-depth understanding about the complexities of this relationship, and again, whether it might differ across different age groups. We also know that well-being is extremely complex. It's such a broad concept to work with, and it's measured in lots of different ways. And what we wanted to do with this project is take a broad view and look at different aspects of well-being. But also enable that in our interviews, because it's quite a subjective thing as well, give the participants the opportunity to talk about wellbeing and what it meant for them in terms of these aspects of wellbeing that we're interested in. So we focused on the positive emotions, as I said, the connection experiences and personal growth. And as I talk through the findings, I'll talk about them in respect to those different aspects of wellbeing as we work through. So who were the children and young people that we interviewed? So this was a qualitative project. So you tend to have smaller sample sizes, but very rich, detailed data. And And we therefore had 24 children who were involved in the project from two different primary schools, one down in England and one in Scotland. They were all reported to be keen readers by their teachers, and that's something that with this project, in order to be able to really understand the powerful effects that reading can have on wellbeing, the potential that reading can have, we needed to have children who were sort of involved in reading fiction and enjoyed reading fiction to be able to answer those questions. We also had 19 young people involved in the project, and they were recruited from 4 schools across Scotland, and again, all reported themselves that they were readers of fiction. Just to give you a quick insight into the actual interview itself, we had sort of broad questions at the beginning of each section, which allowed the person to explore what sort of positive emotions or connection experiences or personal growth they felt they had from their reading experiences. And then we had some of these more specific questions here that kind of were tapping into different areas of wellbeing. Okay, so I'll touch first of all on the findings from the children. We carried out our thematic analysis, and this gave us different sub-themes, as you can see here, underneath the different areas of wellbeing. And I think to demonstrate these, what I'd like to do is give you examples of what the children were actually saying in relation to these different sub-themes, and talk through it in that way. So in terms of the positive emotions that children were having from reading, as you may expect and as you may come across in your own working lives, there was lots of discussion of children enjoying sort of the thrill and the magic and the wonder of reading. But there were also children who it's very much about being calm and escaping into the world of the story, and just a sense of contentment and happiness was coming through. And particularly that was when they were reading a book that they enjoy. So if you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, the top quote by the boy aged 11, that sort of final sentence there really resonates and fits back with what Sarah was saying, this idea that finding books that children enjoy and that are specific to them as a reader is definitely critical as part of this. We also found, however, on the right-hand side of the screen here, this aspect of emotional variability that children were experiencing during their reading. And they didn't want books to necessarily be happy all the way through. They were quite comfortable with this emotional roller coaster that books might take them on, and this variation, as you can see in the quote there from one of our child participants. We also noted that children were quite sort of comfortable in talking about how, you know, they were disappointed or sad or upset sometimes about things that happened in to their favourite characters. And they were sort of comfortable in talking through that and then talking about the resolution that came through at the end of the stories as well. And we were just very impressed all the way through about how the children could express this while talking to us during these interviews. At the bottom of the screen there, our other sub-theme for this aspect was an interaction between children's emotional state and their reading choices. So what we found is that for some children, they would use books almost as mood enhancing in a way. So the quote on the right-hand side of those 2 bottom quotes there, if I read a funny book, I can use that comedy, and it also just makes me feel up and good and happy. And so some children were using this type of thing to select a book specifically to help to sort of support their mood. For other children, they would actually match the book to their mood. So they'd have a couple of books on the go, as this participant on the left-hand side of the screen says, and pick a book that was relevant to their mood on that particular day. And again, thinking about book choices and thinking about the type of book we're in the mood for potentially feeds into this whole idea of trying to match children with books that they're going to enjoy and therefore potentially get the most wellbeing benefits from. Thinking about connection, so we have 3 sub-themes here again, and the first one on the top left-hand corner of the screen was connection with the fictional characters in the story world, and children really were resonating with the characters they were reading about. You can see the top quote there, so sometimes I already knew what they were going through and I feel sorry for them. We had a participant there talking about really being able to resonate with the experiences of a character. And we also had other situations where children sort of could really sort of see aspects of themselves reflected in the book. And I think that was quite important for this connection side of wellbeing, that, as Sarah was saying earlier, it's important there was something that in the books that children could find and connect to their own lives as well. But definitely there was real empathy and real sort of understanding and this ability to relate to the characters they were reading about, and a real investment as well in the characters too. On the right-hand side of the screen there, we had connection with friends. So, of course, children talked about enjoying spending time thinking about the books they enjoy reading and chatting about why they enjoy them, or chatting about differences actually in book choices. but also they were taking inspiration from book characters and the friendships that they had, and they were using books to try and understand their friendships as well. So thinking again about sort of interpersonal skills, they were connecting with the characters and seeing these things that they could relate to their own lives and their own friendships, and sort of building on and learning from that too. And then finally, connection with family. There were lots of lovely instances of children talking about really enjoying spending time discussing books with their parents, with their siblings, making up games related to books with people within their family. And this extended beyond just the family that they lived with, but to grandparents, aunties and uncles, and other people in the family as well. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there, one of the quotes from the children talking about at Granny's house, they have a cupboard that they call the Harry Potter cupboard. And just these lovely examples of reading extending way beyond just the reading situation itself. And then finally, in terms of personal growth for the children, we had again 3 sub-themes. The first one on the left-hand side of the screen, so social and emotional learning that was beneficial to themselves. So we had lots of discussion from the children talking about using books to help them understand not just what was happening to the characters, but taking that into their own lives as well, using it to help them understand things that are happening to themselves or people around them, their family and their friends. We also had children talking about how their reading had actually helped them to feel more confident in sort of their emotional language, if you will. So the quote from the girl at the top of the screen there, that reading's made them feel happy, sad, confused, question themselves, and also be more of a stage where they can say their feelings out loud. So some really powerful things coming through from children's reading in this sense. We had on the right-hand side of the screen, of course, academic development and things that children saw as being important that came through from their reading experiences. So things like reading inspiring them to draw, reading supporting their own writing development at school, and perhaps for some of the children in their own time. And then at the bottom of the screen there, lots of discussion of expanding their life experiences. So reading books about story worlds that obviously they've never experienced in the real world, but enjoying spending time there. Children talked about, I think we had one example about learning about space through fiction. And just having these sorts of wider experiences through the fictional books that they were reading, but also a real kind of sense of trying to understand other people. Because as this lovely quote here in the centre of the screen at the bottom here, children talked about how they could empathise and understand other people's experiences outside of the book better by reading about different perspectives within books. So really learning about getting other people's points of view and trying to understand those, getting practice at that through their fiction reading, and then trying to take it into their everyday life. So I'll also talk a little bit about the young people. So this analysis is still currently, we've not quite finalised it yet, it's still ongoing at the moment. So these are preliminary findings and not quite as detailed as the children, but I'm very happy to keep in touch and share these at a later date if you'll be interested in more findings here. So again, I'll talk about them in terms of the positive emotions, connection and personal growth. And for our young people, we found lots more discussion in terms of emotions that came through in terms of sort of nostalgia, comfort, reassurance, relaxation. And that was sort of slightly different to the children. In terms of the reading environment as well, that came up quite a few times. I think Sarah mentioned this as well from Charlotte's project. Just this having a space where it's quiet and there's less distractions and an opportunity to kind of be able to immerse into the book was particularly important, and the reading environment seemed to be part of that. For connection, there were lots of examples of, again, really close connection with the characters. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, this was a young person talking about how they connected with a particular book character and really sensed it could relate to them, but we're also learning new things from that character. And in this case, they were saying that, in life, things don't always have to be perfect. It'll be okay if things aren't perfect. And again, such a powerful thing to be able to take away from a fictional book. We also had lots of instances of connection with other media, for example. And so that seemed to also be kind of helping in terms of connection with friends and with family, but also supporting kind of your ability to immerse into this world. So as you can see in the bottom quote here, this participant was talking about how they could really visualize the world of the book, and perhaps that was being supported actually because they'd sort of learned the things about this book through the media as well. We also had instances of connection with friends and with family, and grandparents came up quite a few times actually, as sort of sharing these lovely book interactions with their grandparents. And then finally, for personal growth, we had empathy for the self and for others came through quite strongly. So thinking about the stage that they're at in life and sort of taking some sorts of reassurance from the book characters going through those sort of difficult stages. So on the right hand side of the screen there, you can see one of our participants talking about sort of being clueless about where they want to go in life and what they want to do next. And they could really resonate with the character in that sense. And it was helping them to feel sort of more empathy, I guess, for themselves in the situation of the stage of life that they're currently in. But children, so young people were also learning about different concepts and different topics and trying to work out things that they're interested in, things that they want to enjoy and go on to look at in the future through fiction. And then finally, of course, they were really taking sort of the things that they were seeing in fiction books, the situations they were coming across with characters, and trying to learn from them and bring those again into their everyday life to help them to be more empathetic, for example, as a friend. And you can see an example of that in the centre of the screen and in the bottom quote there. So one other final thing I wanted to mention about the young people, we have a question at the end of every interview which just asks about how you feel about taking part in the interview and talking about your reading experiences. And there were just some things that the young people raised that I think were really powerful again, thinking about just by going back and discussing the books that they've read and thinking about them, it was opening up new ways to think about them and new perspectives. And the second quote on the screen there, again, we felt was quite powerful in the sense that this young person was talking about whether at the beginning of the sort of process they thought, oh, I'm like enough of a reader to take part in this interview, to take part in this project. And by the end of the conversation, they'd had so much to say, and there was so much interest and so many different things they were talking about in terms of their reading. It kind of confirms them that actually, you know, they are a reader and it is part of their life, an important part of their life. And that was fantastic to see at the end of that conversation. So one of the things that we found from this work is that we feel as though one of the potentially sort of ways to really get these wellbeing benefits from reading is having these discussions like we had in the interview, really. And it would be great to try and build on this because we think there's so many positive things that could come out of these reflective type questions and really getting children to think and young people to think about what they're reading and what they enjoy and why. In terms of positive emotions, of course, as we've been talking about here, it can really help them to, if we ask children about the books they're reading and what it is that they enjoy about them, it can really help them to maybe think about their future book choices and their identity as a reader. But also it's giving them practice at using emotional vocabulary and talking about these things. And again, across both the children and young people, we were just so impressed about the way that they could express themselves and talk about their emotions in respect to the books that they were reading. In terms of connection, again, discussing sort of the characters and how they feel about them, it was really sort of developing these skills of empathy and perspective taking. And again, there's real potential there, I think, for expanding on that a little bit. We also saw a real enjoyment of talking about their own books. Children enjoyed the interviews and the young people enjoyed the interviews and talking about the books they enjoy reading, but they very much enjoyed those interactions with other people in their homes as well. And then finally, for personal growth, again, thinking about these examples we've seen of developing identity as a reader, but also as an individual and gaining new perspectives on life. So what we'd really like to do, as Sarah was saying, we recognise the huge number of things that are happening in library settings and community settings that are perhaps already working on these ways of supporting wellbeing through reading. And if there are ways for us to support your work or to collaborate and work together, that would be absolutely fantastic. We'd really love to utilise these findings for each of the age groups. I know we've talked about the children and young people today, but for each of the age groups. And one of the ways that we've started to do this is we're developing some reflective reading guides. But what would actually be great is we'd love to share sort of the questions that we use in the interview and the types of prompts that we use for this reflective reading with practitioners and people who are already running perhaps reading and wellbeing support groups and that type of thing to really try and work together and collaborate to make these as successful as possible. So if you are working in that kind of area and we can support you in any way, would you like to collaborate, please do get in touch. That would be absolutely fantastic. Of course, we'd love to understand the wider role of reading and wellbeing. There's non-fiction that we've not actually touched on yet, and there's a huge range of benefits there potentially. Audio books and reading groups in particular, we'd like to understand that better for these different age groups. But also perhaps trying to understand how we can support those who are not currently keen readers to experience some of these wellbeing benefits either from books or from narratives or from audio for listening to stories as well. Maybe there could be opportunities there. So if anything that I've spoken about today or any of these ideas linked to the work that you're doing, please do feel free to get in touch. And again, if we can work together and collaborate and we can support you in any way in terms of advocacy and things as well, please do let us know. We do have a summarised resource from the children's findings, and we'll have one soon for the young people. I'm very happy again to share those with you if they could be of use to you. So thank you very much for listening. And of course, thank you to all the people who participate in our project and shared such wonderful reading experiences with us. And I'll hand back to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Nicola. What I'll do is get Emma to put you and Sarah on screen, and we'll stop sharing the slides for a minute, and then we'll take some questions, if that's okay. That's brilliant. So, and that's lovely. Thank you, Emma. I was just thank you so much for that. That was so interesting, and I was just kind of scribbling down notes as I went. I think with my other background in empathy lab as well, there are so many sort of resonate things that resonate with that as well. So, but I had a couple of questions, but please do put any questions in the chat, and we'll ask them now. But just a couple of things that were asked. I think somebody's put the link to your love reading guide into the chat, which is brilliant. I think those 6 sort of areas of focus are really interesting. I had a couple of things. One for you, really, Sarah, which was about the length of particularly books for young adults, and it's something that strikes me because at the moment I'm busy reading as a judge for our next Read for Empathy list, and the books are really long for young people. Some of them, are really, really thick books. And yet some of the most powerful books are actually things like the Barrington Stoke books that are really short, really punchy, but yet really generate some sort of real powerful emotions. And also, I think there's a real growth in books in rhyme that are really, books in verse that are really easy and quick to read, and also really stimulate that emotional, those emotional reflections. And I just wondered what your reflections were about that.
Yeah, of course. So I'd say, unlike the project that Nicola spoke about, the Reading and Wellbeing project, where we spoke with children and young people who were readers and did read regularly, the 2 projects that we were involved in were speaking with children and young people who didn't read, so we could find out what would motivate them to read. And I think there's something about books that require quite long, sustained engagement. And I think if you haven't been a reader, you don't have that stamina for reading. And I think that the transition to reading longer books really does need to come with having access to shorter texts that really reflect interests. And many of the young people spoke about books being too much of a commitment, too thick. It was just too big for them. And I think one of the things that we'd also like to do is to be able to share our research findings with publishers and the publishing sector as well, so that we can see a shift towards it may be a collection of short stories within a book, for example. But I think that it's very difficult to encourage young people to read when they just don't feel that there's enough shorter text for them as sort of entry points as well. And I would say that for the work that we're doing is very much focused on books, and obviously Nicola's project was fiction books. But when we think about non-fiction, often this is read, unless it's narrative non-fiction, often non-fiction is read in different ways where young people will dip in and out of it. But with fiction books, you are expected to read in a sort of linear way from start to end. And so I really do think that we need to be sharing these findings with authors as well and publishers, so that we can create this kind of entry point into reading.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. So we've got some questions coming in now, and the first one is from Mari, and she's just asking Nicola, how can you just go over how many young people and children you interviewed, and was it in the school or did you go out to other organisations?
Yeah, so they were we did work with the children and young people via schools. So for the young people, 15 young people, and for the children, we had 24. I've got the numbers on the screen as well, 24, I think it was. So yes, they were recruited by schools, and for the primary school children, we sort of did request that the children were readers of fiction or keen readers of fiction, just to enable them to be able to kind of take part in the interview process, really. So yeah.
Thank you. And I've got a question from Ian, but I'm going to ask that in the end because I think it's a good closing question. So I just jumped across. Laura from Norfolk says, I'm interested in how we can find more relatable messaging to young people that's more authentic. Any thoughts from either of you?
I think we need to ask young people that. I think very often it's easy for us as adults, even informed adults, to have these types of discussions. But I really think that we need to do more work with young people to find out what exactly they mean by relatable messaging. So I think the first part of the project was understanding the main themes that are coming up. But I think after that, we do need to be working with young people to find out what they mean by relatable messaging and speaking with different young people as well to find out from them. So I find it difficult to comment on what they may think. I feel like my knowledge base is a million miles away from where teenagers' heads are at. But we learn so much from speaking with children and young people through the work that we do.
Thank you. And then Laura's made a really interesting point from Warwickshire Libraries, and she talks about a really interesting project that they've been running, which is reading for pleasure sessions with small groups, and had some good success engaging with reluctant readers. But she says she hates the term reluctant readers and would never use it with young people themselves. Do you have thoughts about a better way to define this group of readers?
I suppose, so we tend to use the term engagement, and at the beginning I spoke about these different aspects of engagement: behavioral, cognitive, affective, and so we tend to talk about sort of less engaged readers. But actually, to be honest, with the Love to Read project, what we're doing is conceptualizing what it means to be a reader. And I think that we all have things that we're interested in, reasons that we may want to read. We're maybe just at different parts of that journey or more sort of informed as readers. So I do think it's about recognizing that there's a diversity of where we are in terms of the reading spectrum. But I think we tend to use the word engagement as opposed to reluctant or struggling, which is quite a, I think the language that you use can really have quite a significant impact on how children and young people see themselves. And so it's really about trying to be quite inclusive and to recognize that there are different ways to be a reader as well.
Okay.
Nicola, if you'd like to jump in at any point, please say.
I think there's an interesting point. Sorry, I'm barging in here, but about boys and reading. There's a kind of almost like a stereotype, isn't there, about the boys read fiction and girls read non-fiction and girls read non-fiction. Obviously, that's not true at all. But do you have any reflections on boys and fiction? Either of you, really? No?
Just to say, we again, like you say, we spoke to both to boys as part of with the children and the young people, and like you say, really enjoying fiction, really engaged fiction readers. We had some people in the young people's interviews. They were talking about things like graphic novels and things like that as well, and that was coming more from the boys than perhaps than the females involved in the study. But yeah, I mean, in terms of reading fiction, but also in terms of the depth they were going to in the interviews and speaking about the fiction and even interacting sort of and thinking about those emotional sides of things. We had really fascinating discussions with the boys in that respect as well.
And actually, we had another webinar where somebody was talking about the importance of boys being able to engage their emotions, and fiction being a really good way of doing that. So reflecting what you just said. While we've got you, Nicola, Helen says, I was interested in Nicola's comments at the end of her talk about next steps. I'm interested in the use of audiobooks alongside printed books for reluctant readers and those with special needs. Did any of the children and young people in the study mention audiobooks?
I think we definitely had audiobooks mentioned with our other age groups, but I do think for the children and young people, it was more focused on text. We did have these discussions, as I say, they came through a little bit with the adults and older adults. And thinking about the different ways that you read audio or listen to audiobooks, and how you might be listening to an audiobook whilst you're also doing something else, and different ways to kind of access it in that sense. It didn't come through as strongly, I don't think, at the moment with the children and young people. That could just be reflected with the sample that we worked with. But I'd be really, really interested to explore that. And so please do get in touch if there's potential things we could look at there. That would be great. Thank you.
And then Richard is asking, with regards to the first presentation's percentage of children, 43 question mark, who enjoy reading in their free time, is there a current figure for adults? Just curious about the comparison. Do we know that?
I don't think so. So obviously familiar with the National Literacy Trust figures that carry out these surveys via schools. And so I think it's very easy to get a representative sample of children and young people because these surveys are done via schools and demographically diverse schools with kind of geographic reach across the UK. it's really difficult to sample adults in the same way because we don't have the same way to access a representative sample. So, and Nicola and I have been talking about actually how little research there is into adults and older adults reading practices and experiences compared with children and young people. So no, I don't think that there's as far as I know, there's not that same information about um, adults reading. Nicola, do you know of any?
No, there's nothing further I can add there. I don't think, Sarah. I think, yeah.
It's interesting because obviously when the adults are parents, their kind of reading habits are obviously going to have an impact on children, aren't they? So it's interesting. And then actually kind of tied on to that actually is from Helen, and she says, is there much research around engaging children in reading where the parent, household, or wider family culture is non-reading? How can we overcome these perceptual cultural barriers without coming across as being judgmental?
So, shall
Sarah,
I
I don't
go
know
with
if you
this?
want to, yeah, you go.
So I suppose the projects that we're doing are really about school-based practices and what schools can do to promote a love of reading at home. And I think that there's different reasons that parents may not be reading at home. It may be that there's a lack of interest or a lack of confidence in this as well. And I think um, it's it's important that the messages that we give to children really are about the kind of the positive and the benefits of reading as well, but aren't doing it in a way that's sort of undermining other quality activities that may be going on at home that maybe aren't sort of reading activities as well. With the Love to Read project, not Love to Read libraries, but with the Love to Read project, we also have resources which are about building school home connections as well. So that parents can understand why children are being encouraged and supported to read for pleasure too. So I do think that there's quite a lot that needs to be done in terms of supporting the messaging in a way that's not preachy, and in a way that is not judgmental, and that parents and families feel that they can build this into their everyday lives, because parents' lives are often very difficult, very stressful. There's all sorts of demands. There may not be spaces to read. There may not be that provision at home as well. So again, it's about making sure that the messages are given in ways that resonate with them, and that aren't seen to be sort of saying you need to be doing more for your child's reading, because actually school should be and can be the context in which we can support that, and libraries as well.
Yeah, yeah. I always see the kind of triangle, isn't there, around reading for pleasure and reading for everything else, which is the school, the library, and the parent and family. Kind of those three need to work together. Gillian's asked, and it started a little bit of a discussion on the chat, which I always love these kind of chats that go on the chat. But how does the fantasy genre fit into this routine? It's very popular. Do young people read for escapism, and does that benefit them as much as reading about relatable experiences?
It's, I was going to say, I was just going to say from, yeah, yeah, I was going to say from the Reading Wellbeing Project, we had children and young people reading, and well, specific young people reading different genres for different reasons, and I think it was quite specific to what they wanted to get out of the book. So I think, yeah, we're still kind of working with that data at the moment, but I do think it was very much tailored to them having their own interests and their own ideas of what they wanted in terms of what they wanted to get out of their reading. So.
I was just going to say, so we have another project running at the moment, reading a narrative fiction, which has been led by Elena Santi, and she's just about to publish a book chapter which looks at young people's experiences with different genres, actually, whether it's, romance and relationships, comedy, science fiction, fantasy. And I think one of the things that she talks about is the distinction between character-driven and sort of plot-driven narratives as well. And it's often about that connection. And I think every reader will get a different thing out of a book, depending on what they bring to the book as well. So if anyone's interested, we'll have a link on our Literacy Lab website. We have all of our publications, but later this year we should have a chapter out which is looking at young people's experiences with different genres of narrative.
That'd be amazing. We'll look forward to that. Yeah, and we'll try and keep in touch with you all the way through, so that when we can highlight those things when they come out and share them, make sure they're shared widely. So thank you for all your questions. I've got one more question which comes from Ian. Ian, do you want to unmute and ask your question yourself?
I have to remember what it was now. Oh yes. Um, if there was one thing that public libraries could do, in your opinion, to get more young people and children in, what would it be?
Wow.
I know, I'm sorry.
I think that I think that schools are a site where children need to go in the first place. And actually, a lot of the messages that come from teachers about how to support reading for pleasure are about stronger connections with the local library. And so I think the messages do need to come from schools where all children are. And we need to be building closer connections with the library, and they need these positive experiences within the library as well. But I think it can be difficult to encourage children in on their own. I do think school visits to the library are really important, and these positive experiences that they can have there, so that they're choosing to go back afterwards as well. So I think those partnerships with local schools are just essential.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And obviously we're just hurtling quite speedily. And I think in Scotland, I don't know if it's already started, but very soon will be starting Summer Reading Challenge, which is such a powerful part of the year when, you know, we're connecting with schools, also connecting with parents. I think it's one time in the year when actually parents are you know, really coming into the library, actively coming in, seeing what their children are reading, listening to how their children are talking with library staff and with the young volunteers around books. And I think that's such a powerful element in the year, actually, in terms of our support for young people and children's reading. So I'm just going to really thank you both. And thanks everyone in the chat for all those really interesting questions as well. It's really great to have all that engagement going on. If we haven't been able to answer your question, I am very sorry. But maybe we can pick some of those questions up afterwards and come back to you around those. I just wanted to say we have got some more webinars coming up. On the 27th of June, we've got a webinar with the Reading Agency about their cross-authority pilot, the evidence of that cross-authority pilot in terms of the Summer Reading Challenge. So if you're interested in that, in finding out more about that for your authority, or just finding out how it's worked in other authorities, then do come along to that on 27th of June. And then on the 8th of July, we've got a webinar with the BBC about 500 words. And we'll be talking to the BBC about, you know, being recruited as a judge for the 500 words campaign, the next 500 words campaign, which is their story competition for young people. But also we'll be talking about the experiences of being a judge and finding out from Oxford University Press about the research they've been doing on 500 words. So they've been kind of gathering every year as that competition goes on, gathering evidence from children's writing. So there's some fascinating stuff around writing that's coming out of that, and the things that are concerning children and how those come out in their stories. So watch out for those. And then in September, Nicola's coming back by popular demand for a webinar looking at her adult research as well. So that's on the 12th of September. So we'll be advertising that very soon too. So do watch out for that as well. But I'm conscious it's just over 11. So I just wanted to thank Nicola and Sarah very much for that really interesting session this morning. I really appreciated it, and for answering all those questions as well. So thank you. And to everyone else, have a great rest of the day. We'll save the chat so that if we haven't answered your questions, we'll try and get some responses to you later on. So and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for
Thanks
having
for
us.
joining us.
Yeah, and thanks also to Emma, I should say as well, who's kept everything going today.